Hi, I'm Governor John Hickenlooper. You're tuned in to Get More Smarter. Are you sure you don't have something better to do?
All right, it's a hot week in Colorado. Welcome back to the Get More Smarter show. If you're not sweating while you're watching, you can just watch us sweat while we're talking. I'm Jason Bain.
And I'm Alan Franklin.
And let's get right to the big news. This week's going to be our primary preview episode. We've got Ernest Lunning of the Colorado Statesman joining us for an interview a little bit later. But first, a couple of other news items. Donald Trump, it appears, is barely running a real campaign for president.
You might say that he's running a reality TV show campaign
Right.
for president, because, it's not real, but it's all over television.
The numbers are staggering. Trump has 69 staff members, according to the Washington Post, compared to 685 for Hillary Clinton. What this means, not just for Trump in a presidential race, but for states around the country, that means there's not a lot of people on the ground in places like Colorado. What's that going to mean for the ballot?
Campaigns in the general election are a combined effort of national, state, and local field efforts that are all working together. The problem is that Trump is not making any investments whatsoever in a field campaign, it appears, at any level.
And while they do work together, each different group is sort of responsible usually for their own infrastructure.
Well, that's right.
So if Trump doesn't have an infrastructure, the Republican National Committee is going to have to figure out something.
With the possible exception of 2014, Republicans have had terrible luck with field campaign efforts in Colorado in recent elections. They have relied on external resources that were either not brought to bear or didn't work. Organizers on the ground weren't of the best caliber and weren't able to meet their goals.
So maybe they're better off not trying.
Well, no, you got to have some kind of field campaign, folks, or
Right.
you should just pack it in right now.
On the topic of presidential candidates, Ted Cruz
Okay, not a presidential candidate anymore.
was a presidential candidate for the first time since he dropped out of the race, 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Endorsed another candidate, Darrell Glenn, the Republican running for U.S. Senate in Colorado. Ted Cruz was here in Colorado, came in for a quick stop at a hotel right near the airport, endorsed Glenn, left. Why Glenn?
Well, I'll tell you, Darrell Glenn keeps catching these really lucky breaks in this field. He came into the state assembly, he dominated the state assembly, he threw a bunch of other candidates off the ballot there. He had no money from that point to really run effectively in the primary, but he's gotten some help now. The Senate Conservatives Fund came in and endorsed him and provided a badly needed infusion of cash for him. Similarly, Ted Cruz, this endorsement is really big for Darrell Glenn. Ted Cruz swept the delegate race here in Colorado. So he had a great deal of support here. And that support, I think, could very easily translate to support for Glenn. In this vacuum where there's really no clear front runner, Ted Cruz may have just made one.
And the Senate Conservatives Fund, if you're not familiar with that, it was created several years ago by former Senator Jim DeMint. It's really sort of I don't know how far to the right you want to put it, but it's pretty far over to the right wing of organizations. They're very against Mitch McConnell.
That's right.
Senate Majority Leader. For example.
McConnell bashed them openly after the Glenn endorsement, saying that was equivalent to a ticket on the Titanic. Well, I guess we'll see in a week whether or not
Darrell Glenn
that's
could
true.
be a big win for them.
Yeah, that's right.
If they can have a candidate.
Much like Ken Buck was a big win for them in 2010, it's really the same dynamic. The continuously disaffected right wing of the party.
So we've got these 5 Republican candidates running for Senate this year on the primary ballot, but let's put them in order. Give me your 5 in order of finish.
Would have to be Glenn, Blaha, Graham, Frazier, Kaiser, in that order. I think that Glenn, right now, he's really got the big mo in this race, okay? Blaha and Graham both have got a lot of money and have been playing hard, so you can't rule either of them out. I mean, that rounds out the top 3. And then you've got Frazier and John Kaiser.
If I had to rank them, I think I'd put Jack Graham first, just because he's got the most money by far and the most television presence.
Yeah.
Then I'd put probably Glenn and Blaha right behind him, and then Frazier and Kaiser sort of in, way in the rear.
Yeah.
They're getting lapped.
Kind of like holding the Mike Huckabee slot.
Right.
Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody has to. Right now, we're looking at sort of a low turnout election. That could pick up. You're going to see stories in the news and on TV about, if Glenn wins, if Graham wins, what does this portend for the general election? Does it portend anything?
Well, it may not. If we get a really, really low turnout, as it's shaping up to be, why, you've got a random result at that point that you can't really extrapolate into any kind of larger view of where Colorado voters are at. It's just not there. There's not enough of a sample.
If Jack Graham does end up winning, Jack Graham has run pretty consistently on a moderate message. He's really avoided a lot of the red meat that the right-wing candidates throw out. If he ends up winning, I suppose you could make some kind of a case that Republican voters are rejecting the right-wing approach.
You've got a very conservative Republican primary electorate here, and they know where Jack Graham is. They know that he used to be a Democrat. They know that he's pro-choice. I mean, I just don't see them picking a guy that they would, in any other situation, denounce as a rhino.
He's been a Republican for 18 months.
Oh, 18 whole months. Well, that definitely shows some commitment.
I don't know that there will be anything to extrapolate from whoever wins Tuesday, unless, for whatever reason, one of the candidates ends up getting 40, 50% of the vote. That would be interesting. I wanted to ask you about Congressional District 5, Doug Lamborn, the incumbent.
Yeah.
Just about always seems to have a primary opponent. All but 1 year has had a primary opponent.
Yeah.
Calandra Vargas, a relative newcomer, almost knocked him off the ballot in the caucus process. If she beats Lamborn, what does that mean?
You can't talk about Calandra Vargas without talking about Doug Lamborn. Doug Lamborn is one of the weakest members of the
I don't even know that I'd
Congress.
say one of. He might be.
He might be
the
weakest,
435.
the most
He might be at the bottom.
ineffectual, the
Somebody's
most
gotta be at the bottom.
dunderheaded. I mean, he just is not a smart man. Okay, and he's not an effective advocate for conservatives. Districts so safely Republican, you would think that there would have been a movement all this time for a stronger advocate. And I guess there has been, insofar as that he's had primaries just about every election
hard
cycle.
to beat an incumbent.
That's Calandra Vargas, though. She's different. If you watch her videos, she's got just this infectious personality.
Right.
She's a strong conservative. She's very principled. She's young, under the radar of the media, and reaching out to the Republican voters. If she wins, that's going to be a huge shock within the Republican Party in Colorado.
If Calandra Vargas wins, I think Republicans should be very worried about holding on to their seats in Congressional District 6 with Mike Hoffman, Congressional District 3 with Scott Tipton.
Oh, that's right.
If she beats Doug Lamborn, I think that's a pretty good indication
I think that would
in
show
the fall they're in trouble.
It would show an anti-incumbent sentiment beyond anything that we have really been able to quantify up to now.
She's different from the candidates that have tried to primary Lamborn in the past. Those have typically been white, middle class, upper middle class males, often with military experience. But for the most part, it's just two old white guys running against each other.
That's right. That's right.
She's the first. This is the first time he's had a real distinction. Well, frankly, it's a seat that nobody should ever lose. I mean, Joel Heffley had this seat for 30 years.
Yeah.
And the only reason Doug Lamborn is ever at risk of losing this seat is because he's so bad at what he does. Doug Lamborn won a primary with about 16,000 votes, and he's been in Congress ever since because of that.
Everything that's going on this year, this crazy election cycle, so little out there that you can predict. If I were Doug Lamborn, I would be very worried about Calandra Vargas. Two races that I think are most interesting, beyond the top line ones that we all know about, are definitely two Republican primaries in Colorado Springs. Senate District 12, the race to succeed Senate President Bill Cadman between Bob Gardner and Gordon Klingenschmidt. If Gordon Klingenschmidt wins that race, well, I don't know if you can do much more damage to the Republican brand than has been done this election season, but 2017 is looking really bad for those guys if he wins. And then the other one, of course, is the absolute cutthroat slugfest in House District 16 between Larry Liston and Janek Joshi. I'll tell you something that happened this week that isn't getting a lot of attention, but I think is really significant. There was a mailer that hit in House District 16 this week that went into the details of how Janek Joshi actually lost his medical license prior to running for the state house. Despite this, he goes and represents himself on the floor of the Colorado House all the time as a physician, which is ridiculous. And I can't believe that this hasn't been pointed out before now, but Larry Liston, or the PAC that's supporting him, has finally made that an issue in his race, and I think that could be very salient.
And what's funny, too, though, is that at the same time, Larry Liston has had 2 or 3, maybe even 4 of his radio ads actually pulled off the stations where he was running them because they were less than accurate.
Well, you got a very active operative down there,
Yeah, right.
John Hoteling. Is
Right.
that how we pronounce Hoteling?
Hoteling?
Anyway.
I'll go with Hoteling. I'll tell you the races that personally I'm going to be interested in separately, just keeping an eye on. The 2 district attorney races, well, there's more in Colorado, but the 2 big ones in Denver, Michael Kerrigan, Beth McCann, Kenneth Boyd. I think Michael Kerrigan probably comes out ahead there. This is important because whoever wins that race, for all intents and purposes, is going to be the district attorney in Denver for the next 12 years.
That's right.
And then up in Adams County, incumbent Democrat Dave Young being challenged by a Democrat named Karen Dietz, who used to be in the office. I think Dietz could end up winning this primary. If Dietz ends up winning, I think that says something about the way Adams County politics are starting to change and maybe shift, and Democrats are starting to get more organized.
Her being able to force him to petition on, I thought, was a very significant indicator of where she stood with the grassroots versus the unpopularity of Dave Young. So I agree, that's one to watch.
Coming up, we've got a great interview with Ernest Lunning of the Colorado Statesman.
That's Lunning.
Lunning.
I have been getting this wrong for like 10 years now, so Lunning.
So have I. Lunning, not Looning. Lunning. A lot to talk about next week once the primary is over. I'm sure you've got a lot to watch for. We'll see you next week. Welcome back to the Get More Smarter show. We are pleased to have, for the first time here in the studio, we'll use studio lightly, Ernest Lunning from the Colorado Statesman. He's been covering Colorado politics for about 10 years. Ernest, you're the first one to be here in the studio. You get to choose the background. Where are we going to be interviewing you?
Let's go for the aquarium in Finding Dory.
Excellent choice.
How about that?
Excellent choice. We are now in an aquarium. Hope you enjoy the view. So let's get right to it. A couple of big stories that you've broken lately. Ben the Bachelor. I don't watch the show, but Ben Higgins, former Bachelor, current Bachelor.
He's the incumbent Bachelor. He and his fiancee, Lauren Bushnell, are going to be in a new reality show. It's the first one they've ever done, called Life After the Bachelor. It's going to follow their life here in Denver, and one aspect of that is that Ben Higgins is a likely candidate in House District 4 up in Northwest Denver. It's currently represented by Dan Pabon, who is the Speaker Pro Tem.
And this is a pretty solid Democratic district, right?
It's the 3rd highest performing Democratic district in the state. So it's going to be a tough climb for Ben, but if the Republicans are going to find anyone to run against a top Democrat in leadership, they couldn't do better than Ben Higgins. It's going to be on a cable network that used to be called ABC Family Network, and now it's called Freeform. Bachelors often go and do Dancing with the Stars. Ben decided not to do that. Instead, he's thinking about running for office here in Colorado, and some cameras might be following him around in Denver starting this summer, airing in the 2 months up to the election.
I'm going to move on. Before we get to the election and our pre-primary preview, I wanted to ask you about Eric Nelson. This is another story that you broke a couple of weeks ago. Democrat running in House District 42 out in Aurora. There was an Aurora school board meeting last night. He's on the school board.
Well, it turns out Eric Nelson has a knack for self-invention. He's a self-improvement guy, and he improved himself by, the allegations are, awarding himself a number of advanced degrees. And
7, right?
At one point, he's at various points he's listed as many as 7 on his resume, all from schools that either have been closed down, so you can't find out whether he actually went there, or their registrar's office says they have no record of Eric Nelson, and they've asked him to stop saying that he has diplomas from these schools. It turns out Eric has also seems to have given himself a illustrious military career in the Air Force, where he was rose to the rank of captain or major, depending on whether you're reading his resumes or seeing the uniform. Spent 8 weeks in basic training back in 1998 and was honorably discharged, but didn't attain the rank of major.
I would think that would be a record, I would think.
It would be a very, very quick advancement.
8-week advancement.
Even during the Clinton era.
The Aurora School Board, they're trying to kind of get rid of him, but they don't seem like there's a way to do that, right?
They want him to resign. He was elected 3 years ago to the Aurora School Board, and as you mentioned, he's running for a state house seat that's open this year. He's in a primary. But the Aurora Public School Board, they've determined that they can't force him off the board. He answers to the voters.
Right.
After a lengthy meeting, the president of the board and 4 of the other 7 members raised their hands and said, "We want you to resign, Eric." And he said he's not going to resign. He answers to the voters. He's going to stick out his term, and he actually resents the school board raising these questions about his background and his private life.
How dare you bring up my fake background?
Exactly. The primary election against a Democrat named Nikki Jackson out there in North Aurora, that wraps up on Tuesday, and the Democrats, in an unprecedented move, are throwing what they say are substantial resources at making sure that Nikki Jackson wins that primary, because it's also an extremely Democratic seat. But if Nelson were to win, I've heard from a Republican operative who they're just licking their chops for the chance to take on Eric Nelson.
I'm sure. Well, speaking of the primary next week, we got to start at the top. The U.S. Senate race. Sort of start at the bottom. Is anybody out of this race totally? Is it really all 5 candidates? Could any of them win, or is somebody really probably not going to have a chance?
Anyone can win this race.
Would you be surprised if any of the candidates did win over another?
I think given recent news coverage and fundraising figures, it would be a bit of a surprise if John Kaiser emerged on top. He came into the race as the favorite of the Republican establishment, and rumor has it that the NRSC, the National Republican Senatorial Campaign, had recruited him and pictures him and views him as being the strongest contender against Michael Bennet.
And then he campaigned. Then he started.
Well, he campaigned well for a while. He's run into some problems with his petition gathering and what they refer to as a Marco Rubio moment on video. But there's John Kaiser's got a lot of fans out there.
If the election were today, how would you handicap it?
I think it looks like a real horse race between Darrell Glenn, the El Paso County Commissioner, and Jack Graham, the former CSU athletic director and insurance company owner. They're running from the right wing of the party for Darrell and the more centrist or left wing of the party for Jack Graham. The outcome would paint very different pictures of the party and the candidates' chances against Bennet, depending on which one of them won. I hear if Jack Graham wins, the Democrats are not going to take anything for granted.
Sure.
He'd be a tough candidate. He comes in the mold of several of Colorado's previous Republican senators. I think Michael Bennet, who does have low approval ratings and he's got a lot of money in the bank, but what Democrats are finding, congressional and Senate candidates around the country, is that there's going to be a lot of ticket splitters this fall.
Makes you feel all right about not voting for Trump.
Right.
In a sense. Yeah, I can see that.
And,
sure.
That's going to be a danger to Bennet. If national Republicans decide that this seat is in play, whoever the nominee is not going to lack for resources.
This is the best case scenario probably for Bennet. If we were talking a year ago, they'd probably be happy with the way things are right now.
I'd imagine they're ecstatic, but a year ago they were concerned that George Brockler, the district attorney down in Arapahoe County, might get in. They were concerned that Mike Kaufman might get in. There are some other strong candidates there too.
Sure.
Ryan Frazier has run statewide before. He's
not very good, but not very well.
He moved into a congressional race, and I think you'll remember then he ran against Ed Perlmutter out on the west and north side of town. And I think everyone agreed that year, that was back in 2010, that Ryan Frazier ran the best campaign of anybody out there.
And he still lost by 11 points, though, in a wave Republican year. That was the Tea Party year of 2010.
It was a tough year for a Democrat, and Ed Perlmutter pulled it out.
Let's look at a couple of the congressional races. There are 3 candidates, 3 incumbents looking at primaries on Tuesday. If we do them in numerical order by district, Diana DeGette in Denver, running against Chuck Norris. No, really, Chuck Norris. Not that guy, but Chuck Norris. What's going to happen there?
I think Diana DeGette's going to be cruising to another term, but I think she's going to be surprised on Wednesday how well Chuck Norris does. He's got a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters. He's also got a lot of folks who look at the name and say, Congressman Chuck Norris doesn't sound too bad.
Congressional District 3, the West Slope, Southern Colorado. Incumbent Republican Scott Tipton has a primary challenge, a sort of relatively unknown younger guy from Carbondale. Any chance that this guy beats Tipton?
Alex Feinstein?
Yeah.
No, there's no chance that he beats Tipton.
Let's move then quickly to Congressional District 5 down in Colorado Springs. Doug Lamborn, the incumbent, I think he's coming up on 10 years. Never been without a primary, if I remember. Maybe once. Yeah, that's right. One time been without a primary. This might be his toughest one yet with Calandra Vargas. Can she pull that out?
I think if we wake up on Wednesday morning and are gobsmacked, it's going to be because Doug Lamborn gets defeated by Calandra Vargas. Doug Lamborn is no stranger to primaries. He's dispatched primary challengers with apparent ease ever since he emerged from a crowded primary back when the seat became open when Joel Heffley retired. What I'm hearing is Calandra has a lot more excitement behind her, and she could surprise us.
Are you hearing that the Lamborn folks have been getting nervous and really pushing back in the last month or two?
Well, the Lamborn folks never take anything for granted. They ran really hard against Robert Blaha a couple years ago. They run hard against Bentley Rayburn, who surprised Congressman Lamborn by making the primary ballot last time. But they're not taking anything for granted. They're throwing everything they've got at Calandra.
Well, it would be a surprise on Wednesday, but one that you can say you saw coming because you saw the Get More Smarter show. Ernest told you.
That's right.
District attorney races that are really important, particularly in Denver, where there's a three-way race: Michael Kerrigan, Beth McCann, and Kenneth Boyd. This race, there will be a general election in the fall, but for all intents and purposes, whoever wins this primary on Tuesday has the next 12 years to be district attorney. How do you sort of handicap that race?
Well, if you look on the Secretary of State's site, those three candidates are the top fundraisers so far this year for
Across
the
the state,
cycle,
yeah.
Across the state.
Except for federal races, obviously.
Except for state candidates. And there's a reason for that, and it's like you say, whoever wins that, it's probably, Michael Hancock might argue, but it's probably one of the most powerful positions in the state, being Denver District Attorney, and Denver District Attorney hasn't been defeated for re-election in living memory. Someone wants to run, wins the office, they can keep it for 12 years. It's a 3-term limit that Denver voters have approved, so it's a good place to be.
Now my sense is it's really between Kerrigan and McCann. Is that what you're hearing?
That's I think the smart money's on a close race between Kerrigan, who's a CU regent and has experience both as a defense attorney and a prosecutor, and Beth McCann, who's a state legislator, has been Denver's manager of public safety, and worked in the Attorney General's office. She's got a lengthy resume.
We move up to Adams County area district attorney. Dave Young is the incumbent Democrat. Used to be a Republican, is now a Democrat. A lot of Democrats didn't seem to like him. Karen Dietz almost knocked him off the ballot entirely at through the caucus process. That's a big primary coming up on Tuesday. Can Karen Dietz keep that momentum and get rid of Dave Young?
We'll see. That's going to be a tough race. Yeah, Dave Young had to petition onto the ballot after he didn't make it on at the assembly. Dietz actually worked for him as an assistant prosecutor and left during what's turned into a scandal that 9 News has done a lot of work on about some accusations of gender-based discrimination for promotions in the office. And so she's got an argument against Young. Whoever's got the more avid fans is probably going to win a lot of these races, and that could be what happens in Adams County and Broomfield.
And when you get turnout this low, it is hard to tell because you could have one candidate who just gets a couple thousand diehard supporters, and that pushes them over.
Right.
Well, Ernest, oh shit, I did it. I wasn't going to do it.
That was close.
Ernest Lenning with the Colorado Statesman, thank you for joining us here on Get More Smarter. I hope you've enjoyed your background. Well, you'll enjoy it when you see it. And
we'll see what happens. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks very much. And we'll be right back. All right, that's it for this week's edition of the Get More Smarter show. I'm sweatier than John Kaiser at a Republican debate, and so we're going to get on out of here. Have a good week.